growing up with two sisters, especially two sisters that we were all 3 and 4 years apart, sisterhood has always been really, really important to me. Being a middle child, I was used to always having someone around. And especially because I was a little different, I didn't always have friends, especially when I was younger. And so I relied heavily on my sisters, and they are to this day still my first and forever best friends. But sisterhood was something that was always really, really important. And after just some unfortunate experiences with white people and just with my mom and my aunt, who were really, really big in Black culture, by middle school, high school, I knew that I wanted to go to an HBCU, and I knew that I wanted to join a particular sorority. In fact, I was ahead of the game going into high school with my knowledge and being connected and those things. And so it was just one of those things that going into school, I knew that I wanted to do. And if you're familiar with, HBCUs, especially Southern HBCUs, Greek life is everything down there. And it's a big deal, especially, and it was a big deal on my campus. And anybody who was anybody was a part of a specific or particular organization. And it was just something, I don't know, even to this day, I don't really know what it is and what that thing is, but for the most part, at least at my school, you knew who was going to be what, and you knew how things would play out. And so, but also like there were certain steps and just a certain criteria and just certain things that you had to do to be a part of them. And so literally from the day that I stepped foot on campus, I knew what I wanted to do and which organization I wanted to be a part of. And I got to work, with those steps. And depending on who you ask, they'll tell you that it was already written. But for me, at least for me, I don't take anything for granted, and I believe in working hard for anything. So I was excited and I was willing to do whatever it takes. They have a thing that they say, it's about being made. They have this term, being made. And it kind of referred to people who, went through the process and, the right way, quote unquote. And so a lot of times that process, and it varies across organizations, amongst chapters and different institutions and kind of across the board. But for the most part, the process itself is supposed to be character building. It's supposed to develop sisterhood and or brotherhood, depending on the organization. And it was really about mastering humility. And if you knew me back then, well, if you know me now, and even to know me back then, I'm a lot more humble now than I was then. But even still, I went into school and I went into the process knowing that that was a thing. And so fast forwarding all of this, I finally it's also a game of patience, because you never know when it's going to happen. And so it's one of those things of, you got to stay ready so you never have to get ready. And so your girl was always ready. And it was something that I wanted so bad. I always kept my eyes open. I was always on my toes. And so without going too deep in it, at least for me, then, and it's funny because I've had people ask me about this incident, even up to now, and it's been almost 10 years old. But I still I believe then, and I believe now, that there's a fine line between humility and humiliation. And what I've learned from being a part of the process myself, but also now fast forward some almost 10 years later, helping and assisting other young ladies and young men through that process, I still stand firm in that. And I believe that depending on who is in charge of your process and their character and their attitude and their mental health and their well-being, determines what that process looks like. And at that time and at my institution, And I think not even just at the institution, I think it's kind of across the board, because we've seen it in the headlines. It wasn't always about humility. In some cases, it was about humiliation. And even from now, even to then, I was somebody who I don't care what it was or what it is, there's a line for me when it comes to, how much of myself and my self-respect and my dignity and my pride and my identity that I was just not going to cross. It didn't matter who it was or what it was. And I stood in that then, and I stand in that now. I think that should be the same for everybody. Now, what your line is and what your line looks like is going to vary from person to person. And it's for some folks' lines are thicker than others. But I know that I had a line, and I still do, and it's very, very clear. And I think it's important, not just with sororities and fraternities and just in joining an organization. I think it's with anything. As somebody who studies identity and who I work with folks in their personal development, research shows and just life will show you that if you do not have a strong sense of self and a strong sense of identity before you start to join organizations and get assigned roles like, being a parent, or a guardian or a certain profession, when you don't have a strong sense of self before then, sometimes you can get absorbed by them and they can become your identity. I hear all the time, I meet women and men who they think their only role in life is to be a parent. And while I do believe that your purpose, a part of our purpose in our reason for being on earth and for being in the families and the roles that we're in is to be parents. But that isn't your only purpose, right? When God brought you to this earth, he didn't just bring you to be a parent. He also brought you, I believe that purpose is in various moments, and you can have, and it's in different roles and in different times. And if you're not careful, you can easily get caught up in labels, in organizations, and allow other people and things to control and define who you are. And that was very common in college. You would meet someone, and then they would join an organization or join a team or a sports group or get around a certain group of friends, and you could watch them change and become somebody different, right? And I've seen it happen time and time again. I always promised myself that I wasn't going to be that person. But also at that time, after struggling with my identity for so long in elementary, middle, and high school, by the time I got to college, I was pretty excited and pretty solid in who I was. And so all that to say, when I was going through the process, there were a few incidents that happened in which I may have stepped on a few toes. They were all unrelated to the actual process of joining the organization. However, some of the young ladies felt the need to, again, that line between humility and humiliation. They tried to use the process and my desire to be a part of the organization to, now I can call it what it is, but bully me. Like literally bully me. And I think it's important to say that because, especially as a strong person, and I think in being able to admit that, and I consider myself to be a very strong and tough girl or woman now, but I was even a tough and a strong girl or woman then. And that we have this idea, even today I see it so much online, we think that because a person or an individual is tough or strong, that somehow they cannot be a victim of bullying. And that is not true. One of my favorite artists is Nicki Minaj. And I think I've always loved her so much, and I've always defended her. Like literally, I've almost come to blows about her. Because I never understood why people thought it was okay to bully her just because she could take it. And I was someone who people would bully. And it'll be passive. I mean, it's like passive aggressive bullying, but because people assume that I could take it and they perceive me as tough and strong, many a times, like, it was almost as if people thought it was okay. And even more so when I responded and I tried to stand up for myself, I became the mean girl. I became the bully. I became the villain, which I think is also one of the reasons kind of why I started to just stop responding altogether, because no matter how it played out, I was always going to be the bad guy. And so that's kind of how it played out in this incident, in which, for those who know the full story, and I won't go into detail because all of it isn't my story to share, but if you know the whole story, it was not that deep, and it really had nothing to do with me, and it boiled down to bullying. And I was someone who was not going to put up with it. And I stood my ground. And when I stood my ground, I was told that I was not going to be a part of the organization, at least not that go round. And I didn't care. I still kept going through the process, and I still applied, and I still did my thing, still did it. And of course, I knew it, but I wanted them. I'm a big and a firm believer. I tell my students and my clients, and even like my close friends and family, like, never tell yourself no. If it's something not for you, let them tell you no. Let that thing tell you no, but don't tell yourself no, and don't count yourself out. So I was going to see it through to the end. And I did, and I didn't make it. And for those who knew, including those in administration who knew, they gave me the option to appeal it, because they knew that I could have and should have been a member of the organization. But just as I feel strongly about that today, of I don't want to be a part of anything or a part of anyone who doesn't want me to be. I don't believe, like, hey, Jesus wept and Jesus left, right? I'm a firm believer that when I am in a place and I'm not wanted, I don't want to be there. And I also wasn't going to join another organization just to say that I joined one. And so I'll tell that there's a part 2 to that I'll get to, but we'll fast forward. And so that was the first go round. And then I was also told, that let me back up. There was also another tradition on our campus that the miss of our university, right? I know for most public institutions, they have like a homecoming queen. For HBCUs, they have a miss and a mister, who kind of serve as student leadership alongside the president and SGA and all that stuff. And so it was tradition at my institution for some of the major sororities to have a miss candidate. And so it was also assumed that I was going to run for miss. And I was going to run for miss on behalf of said organization. And so I was told secretly that if I continued and chose to run, that I could kiss my chances of joining the organization completely. Like, the first time was just like a tester, but they were like, nope, if you run, you aren't going to be in it at all. And that broke my heart, because those were the 2 things that I said when I stepped foot on that campus. I said that I knew that I was going to do, and I had my heart set on doing them. But me being me, again, I see it through to the very, very end. I ended up running anyway. And I won. And of course, I could kiss my chances of being a part of the organization goodbye. But again, like, I'm laughing, and it sucks, because in that moment and when it was happening, it was so horrible, and I was so mortified, and I was so heartbroken, because again, sisterhood is so, so important to me, and it's something that I really, really wanted to do, because of my heart. And I knew that I knew what the organization stood for, and I wanted to be surrounded by those kinds of women. But also, I thought that I could be a great asset. I knew that I would be a great asset to the organization. But nonetheless, it's one of my chronicles, and it's something that I stand by to this day, and that is, if thou will be denied my rhythm, if you deny my blues. And one of those things that you have to take all of me or you get none of me, and I stand in that. I think it's also important, and especially in that time, is I think whenever you're going through something, it's always 10 times worse when you are on public, when your situation and your trauma is on display for everyone to see, because everyone felt the need to have an opinion about it and to ask me questions. And when I tell you, it was one of the hardest seasons of my life, because at that time, again, I hate the term popular, but I was well known on campus. And so when I didn't make it, it was constant questions, and people wanted to know, and those who did know, and I was in group chats. People made memes about me. People said really hurtful things about me. There was things on Twitter, and me being me and knowing that I wanted to become the Miss of my university, I knew that what that role entailed. I was advised, and I believe that I did the right thing, and that I didn't respond at all. And that was really hard. If you know me, that was really hard to do, because I had a desire to really defend myself, because I really felt that I did nothing wrong and that I deserved the opportunity, but I said nothing. I remember crying and praying. I'm like, I'm a firm believer that, and the Bible says that, God knows the desires of your heart. And I didn't believe that God would put that desire in my heart if he didn't want me to be a part of that organization. So I just didn't understand why it was happening and what I did to make others so mad, to say the things that they said and to do the things that they did. And I was even angrier that I couldn't respond. But one thing that I say, and I know we probably hear a lot, and everybody will say it, and again, I don't mean to shove God down anybody's throat, but I love to believe, and I stand firmly in that I am one of God's favorites, okay, if not his favorite child. And you know what? You don't gotta like it if you feel the way about yourself. You should, but I do. And he don't play about me. And so I knew that if he was telling me not to respond and not to react, it meant that he was going to take care of it. And that's kind of how it's been my whole life. That there were times when I took vengeance upon myself. And I think I tell people all the time, and the Bible says that vengeance is not ours, but the Lord's. I think that's so important, because sometimes, like in that situation, when people happen to you, right? God sees it. Right? He sees it. He sees it when I happen to people, because I always say, you don't have to beg me to apologize, because he gets me together behind the scenes. One thing about me is that I have never had an issue saying I'm sorry, because he will get me together. And so I know that if I hurt you, he'll put me right in my place, and I'm sorry. I had a friend like, Tania, you apologize. I'm like, I don't apologize enough, child, for all of the things that I do. But I believe that just the same way that he rallies for people, and he holds me accountable for what I do to others and the hurt that I do to others, I know that he does that for me. And so whenever he tells me not to respond and not to retaliate, I know that he's working things out on my behalf. And child, lo and behold, he sure was. Because I want to say maybe 2 weeks later, guess what? That entire organization got shut down, child, and kicked off campus for, I want to say, 5 years. And everybody got hit with fines. Some of which, and this is not me laughing at those women, because some of those women are my friends. They are my friends then, and they are my friends to this day. And so I never wish bad on anybody, not just them or any of those young women, because we were all young, and sometimes to be old and wise, to be older and wiser, you had to be younger and dumber. And so I don't blame any of the women for anything they did, because they did what they thought they should be doing at that time. And I can say that if I was in their position, that I wouldn't do the same thing. Hopefully not, but who knows? And I'm grown enough now, and I've remedied those relationships to a point where it doesn't even matter. But in God fashion, right? He showed up and showed out for me in that, and I had nothing to do with it. I ain't no snitch. Not shading you if you are. I just ain't built like that. But I had nothing to do with it. But literally no less than 2 weeks later, it was almost like as if God said, like, if my baby can't be a part of your organization, then nobody can be a part of your organization. And they were kicked off campus for 5 years. And so I didn't get to stroll, and neither did they. It was almost like God saying, like, you don't touch my children. And then he protects those that he loves. And I really believe that. I think it's also important because one of the main reasons why I wanted to be a part of that organization was for the sisterhood. And I think many a times because we have these desires, we're willing to do anything and everything to be a part. And what's so funny is that fast forward, I would have a royal court with little sisters that I didn't choose, but they were also elected. And child, they got on my nerves. They were Southern belles, child, and I was this hood booger from the city, from Philly, and we just had nothing in common. They got on my nerves so bad, and I would always complain about them so much, but it was so important that we, at least to others and on our platform, and we know we played a game, right, that we had to always make sure that we presented sisterhood. And so it's interesting because I was always looking for sisterhood in that and joining that organization and with my friends. But one thing that I will never forget, and a time I will never forget, is that, and I almost forgot it, which is so interesting. But when I was in my abusive relationship, it was around that time. And so mind you, I'm going through all of those things on top of dealing with things at home. And I remember, I tried to tell my best friend at the time, and she was not very supportive. I didn't know who else to tell. And so I'll never forget the day that I kicked him out of our apartment, because the apartment was in my name. And so I had packed up all of his things, put everything outside. And again, I think it's important, and to giving myself grace. And I think for anybody who is ever in these situations, to give yourself grace for all of your feelings. I know I'm somebody who beats myself up if I feel like I'm not feeling the right thing at the right time. But I think it's so important that you feel your feels when you need to. That's the only way that you'll get to the truth. And the only way that you can grow from it and move on from it is when you get to that truth and sit in it and own it. Sometimes you gotta sit in the ish to get out of it, right? And so I remember I was conflicted of, even though I knew that it was an unhealthy relationship, I knew that it was time for us to separate. I knew that he had to go. And I had lined things up to the best of my ability for that to happen. I still felt nervous, right? That he might say something that makes me take him back, or that he would actually do something that would put me in danger. And so I believe we either had an event or something that we had to do the next day. And so I had to connect with them anyway. I remember it was very last minute, very impromptu, but I told them what happened and what was going on. I asked them to stay with me. And even though we had been having our beef and we were always going at it, child, and it was always them versus me, it's okay, I could take them all, literally, physically, mentally, all of that. But I remember that I asked them, and no questions asked, they showed up. And that night when he came, and mind you, he came and he was banging on the door and he was ready. I don't know what he was going to do. But I remember when he opened the door and he saw them sitting there, his whole demeanor changed, and he became this, oh, hi. But he was mad as hell when he first got changed the locks and everything. I was slick, child. It was like one of those, and if you ever seen the movie Enough with J-Lo, child, I was very meticulous. When I need to be, I am very meticulous and very strategic. I'm a gangster, for real. But I remember he opened the door and he saw them there, and he was like a different person. And then so I ended up closing the door in his face, and he just kept calling, and they were just so supportive and so comforting. They kept trying to distract me and make me laugh. I remember they were helping me clean out my closet and find, I think we were finding outfits for the following day. I forgot. And then finally, after he had called me a million times, he was like, I just want you to hear me out. And so I had agreed to meet him at the pool. Like we were in an apartment complex, and the apartment complex had a pool across the street. Like I lived across the street from the pool. And I remember they were like, okay, Tania, you got 15 minutes. And if you are not back in 15 minutes, we're calling the cops. And it meant so much to me. Mind you, these are young girls who were younger than me. One of them wasn't, was my age, but the rest of them were younger than me. So just having them and having their support meant everything. And so I remember I went to the pool, and he sat on one side of the pool. I made him go to the other side. I was on the other side. I made sure I was on the side next to the door. So if I knew he couldn't swim, and I knew he couldn't run faster than me. So I knew if worst case scenario, I had an exit strategy. And so of course he talked and he cried and he had everything to say. And literally 15 minutes on the dot, they were calling me like, are you coming back yet? And I was like, I'm on my way right now. And they stayed on the phone with me until I got back. And it's funny because, not funny, but it's almost interesting that I almost forgot that they did that. And I think even more so, I don't think I ever thanked them enough for showing up for me that way and for keeping that a secret, because to this day, most people didn't know and didn't even believe that I was in a domestic violence relationship. And I realized that was because those 4 women kept my secret. And they showed me in that moment the true definition of sisterhood. And it wasn't something that they were obligated to do because of us being a part of the same organization, and I didn't bully them into it. They had the option. They had the option in that moment, and they had an option even after that to keep that secret. And to me, that's sisterhood. And I wish that more women, especially Black women, did that for each other, because we can see in just today's society that this country was not designed, and whether you look at that systemically or systematically, to protect Black women. And if they aren't going to protect us, then we got to protect ourselves. And like I always say, I am my sister's keeper, and my sister is anybody who shares in that struggle with me. And so I never had the opportunity. I don't think I might have. I'm sure I did, because I have manners. I know I did it in that moment, but I don't think I did it with this level of sincerity and and with this level of gratitude. And so, from the bottom of my heart, if any of those women are watching today, thank you, because you may have saved my life, and if you didn't save it, you definitely changed it. And you have my undying loyalty, and love and support, position or not, crown or not, always. And I appreciate you. And I hope that you know that you have a sister in me forever, forever, always.